My name is Alex Uhas, and I'll be doing my presentation on the Lewis and Clark expedition. To start out, we'll be talking about Manifest Destiny, or Sea to Shining Sea, and that is the goal of settling the United States from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. And President Jefferson's two main goals for the expedition were, one, the scientific goal, which was to map out the entire United States from east to west, and a diplomatic goal, which was to establish relationships with Native Americans along the way. Lewis and Clark were the first ones to step up to the president's tasks, and this is because the president was a friend of Meriwether Lewis, and overall President Jefferson's goals were accomplished through the preparation of the expedition, the journey itself, and the aftermath of the expedition. Meriwether Lewis was a Jeffersonian Democrat. He assisted the president in his term in office, and he also absorbed a lot of Jefferson's ideas while assisting him, and those ideas were geography, science, politics, Native Americans, and diplomacy. And Meriwether Lewis was also basically groomed to lead this expedition, and that was all found on the United States Parks Department website. William Clark joined the expedition crew after Lewis had already done months of preparing, and the main thing that William Clark brought with him to the expedition was 9 young men from Kentucky who would form the backbone of the expedition crew. And the preparation for the journey, the president pitched the journey to Congress as a very low budget expedition and made sure of that so it wouldn't cost the taxpayers a lot of money. And he only asked for $2,500 for the entire expedition. And once the expedition was approved by Congress, it was set to launch from Camp Wood in the summer of 1804. The expedition itself, the pair arrived in Cairo, Illinois on November 15th, and Lewis and Clark worked jointly on their first scientific research project in describing the geographic junction of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and that was found on National Geographic's website. And leg one of the journey lasted through the summer of 1804. So Sacagawea was a Shoshone woman. She was born a Shoshone woman in today's Idaho, and at a young age she was kidnapped and sold into the slave trade. And she eventually was bought by a Canadian fur trader, Toussaint Charbonneau, who eventually claimed her as his wife and had children with her. And he also was an integral part of the translating team on the expedition, as well was Sacagawea. And she was an integral part of the translating team because she could translate a Native American language to another Native American language, and her husband could then translate that Native American language to French, and then a man on the expedition team could translate French to English, so everyone could communicate and talk properly between each other on the expedition and communicate with Native Americans to establish those relationships. And when she met the explorers, she was 6 months pregnant with her son Jean-Baptiste, who later became America's youngest explorer. So the expedition itself, in the spring of 1805, there was favorable weather, and the team set out on the next leg of the journey, following the Jefferson River to Three Forks, Montana. This route delivered the team to the doorstep of the Shoshone Indians, who were very good at getting through the mountainous terrain up ahead on horseback. And when talking to the tribe, Sacagawea actually found out that her brother was the chief of the tribe, and the diplomatic relationship between the American citizens and the Native Americans was accomplished through that relationship that they found. And November 24th, 1805, the expedition reached the Columbia River, and which emptied into the Pacific Ocean, so they reached the west coast by that time. And they built Fort Clatsop, which they constructed, and decided to settle there for the winter so they wouldn't be traveling in harsh conditions and whatnot. And the return journey was where Sacagawea was most valuable. as far as navigating goes, because she was very valuable for translating and everything else. And as the team passed through her homeland, she remembered the Shoshone trails from her childhood, so she was able to get them through that no problem. And when the team returned to the Hidatsa village on August 14th, 1806, marking the end of the trip for Sacagawea and her family, they exchanged their thanks and parted ways. And the team ultimately returned in September of 1806 to St. Louis to report their findings to President Jefferson, and that was all found from the National Archives website. And this map right here maps out the entire journey from start to finish. And the yellow line, you can see, starts in St. Louis, goes all the way up to Fort Clatsop, where they built and settled in the winter. And then the red line separates here because Clark went through the river terrain and mapped all the rivers on the boat, while Lewis went through the like forest terrain and established relationships and made graphs and tables and pictures of all the different wildlife and whatnot. And in conclusion, Lewis actually legally adopted Sacagawea's children after her death, which was, she died at age 25 when she was giving birth to her second child. And ultimately, both goals were accomplished in this expedition, and relationships were established and maps were made. Thank you very much, and these are my sources.